You may read in the papers about obstructions in one colony or another, but I do not speak incautiously when I say that the union of all the provinces is a fixed fact. The mere struggle for office and fight for position, the difference between the outs and the ins, have no charms for me. But now I have something worth fighting for, and that is the junction of Her Majesty's subjects in all British North America as one great nation.
Gordon had been offered a new post in Hong Kong, but when Smith wins the election, Gordon decides to stay on, to see Confederation through. He writes many letters to Edward Cardwell, the colonial secretary in England, regarding the problem of the Anti-Confederates.
Smith is a man of some ability and some considerable obstinacy. His views are narrow and his temper violent, but though very impatient of opposition or control, I believe him to possess the merits of honesty, of purpose and resolution. He belongs to the radical section of politicians, but at the same time is very hostile towards the U.S.
In June 1865, Smith and his Attorney General, John Allen, go to Britain to make their position on union clear to Cardwell.
The British government is not in a position to know what is for the benefit of or what suits the province.
Cardwell is affronted and informs Smith that Britain is committed to union. When Smith comes home, he finds things falling apart. Sod is broken on the Western Extension Railway in November, but it doesn't go any farther. Private money is needed, and the contract with an American company falls apart. As well, the fickle United States abrogate the Reciprocity Treaty in 1866, despite Smith's efforts to convince them otherwise on a trip to Washington. Vacancies on the bench because of these disappointments caused dissension and defection from cabinet. After the Americans reject reciprocity, Smith has no program. With Smith's original cabinet fragmented, many turn against him in favor of Confederation. Meanwhile, on a trip to London, Lieutenant Governor Gordon is instructed to further the cause of union by every means within his power. For weeks, Gordon presses Smith to pursue a pro-union policy that would be acceptable to the imperial authorities, the Canadians, and the majority of New Brunswickers. Smith is honest, stubborn, and has a hot temper. He is convinced that the Quebec scheme would be terrible for New Brunswick, but the disorganization of his cabinet wears down his resolve. Gordon finally convinces him to add a vaguely worded acceptance of the Confederation principle into his March 1866 throne speech. Debates in the House carry on for another 4 weeks with Confederates who don't want Smith to get the credit for Confederation. And by his speeches in the House, Gordon realizes that Smith is returning to an anti-Confederate position. Gordon forces him out of office by instructing the upper house, the appointed Legislative Council, to send a strongly worded pro-Confederation reply to London before the elected members of the Assembly have voted on it. In a colony with so-called responsible government, this is an illegal act. A furious Smith confronts Gordon for overstepping his authority, but Gordon is unapologetic and suggests he resign. Smith could fight on the grounds that Gordon's interference is unconstitutional, but instead he resigns 3 days later, and New Brunswick is plunged into another election. 5 days later comes news of the first Fenian raid on New Brunswick. These are mainly former Civil War soldiers sympathetic to the cause of Irish independence. Though little more than a skirmish, it comes at just the right time for the Confederate movement. To distance themselves from the Fenians and show loyalty to the Crown, many New Brunswick Catholics began to support British-American union. During the election, the Confederates imply there is a French and Roman Catholic conspiracy against Protestantism and the Empire. But Smith defends his constituents.
I felt proud of the French population of this country. They would compare favorably in every respect with the English population. They were incorruptible and could not be bought.
But a pattern is set for New Brunswick politics which would persist. The mainly Roman Catholic and Acadian bloc on one side, and the predominantly Protestant and English-speaking bloc on the other. Fears of invasion, along with money from MacDonald and British backing, causes Tilley to sweep the election. Afterward, Smith and his group of 8 antis face 33 pro-Confederates in the Assembly. A Confederation resolution is offered up in June 1866. Smith tries to head it off with a list of demands to change the Quebec scheme that are more favorable to New Brunswick, but his motion for a referendum is rejected. Meanwhile, Gordon heads off to his next assignment, Trinidad, and resolves never to work in a self-governing colony again. In August 1867, Smith is elected to the House of Commons for the county of Westmoreland.
I'd fought against Confederation and was conquered, and laid down arms, and I am anxious to assist in working out the measure.
But by New Year's Eve, Smith makes a much less positive speech in St. John to a packed hall.
We are utterly powerless under the controlling power of Messrs. MacDonald and George Etienne Cartier.
In the new country's first 6 months, the federal government puts levies on items like flour, meal, corn, sugar, tea, molasses, and spirits, most of which are staples. The route chosen for the intercolonial railway, not completed until 1876, is also hotly contested. The seaworthy economy of the Maritimes gradually evaporates as central Canadian policy predominates. And within 2 years, the fickle New Brunswick papers report that Smith had it right all along. In his book Looking for Bootstraps, author Donald Savoy writes, "It soon became clear that Albert Smith and Nova Scotia's Joseph Howe had been right all along. The Maritime Provinces were the junior partners in Confederation, with limited influence on the country's political and administrative institutions. MacDonald left no doubt that he saw the provinces precisely in that light." In the ensuing years, Smith continues to be re-elected in the county of Westmoreland, and in 1877, as Minister of Marine and Fisheries, he wins an East Coast fisheries arbitration with the United States, worth $5.5 million. This was a huge sum, an unexpected coup for Canada, and it wins Smith the first knighthood for a New Brunswicker. An irony for a politician who has spent his career fighting against perceived British privilege. Sir Albert continues to be re-elected by his constituents until 1882. He dies the following year after his defeat at the age of 59. In 1867, the London Times stated, "Half the useful things that are done in the world are done from selfish motives under the cover of larger designs." Confederation may have been useful for Great Britain and for the Canadas, but not for the Maritimes. Smith may have failed to unite the Anti-Confederates and secure a better union deal for New Brunswick, but his honesty and boldness is an example for politicians of any era. If nothing else, Smith was not afraid to challenge the status quo. He accepted the reality of Confederation once it became inevitable. And though it was not an ideal situation, he spent his 30-year career fighting for the rights of his province. So like Albert Smith, let's not be afraid to change, Let's lay down our arms, roll up our sleeves, and work out the measure. After 150 years, it's up to us.